Hey everyone, hi, welcome or welcome back to my channel. I am Shelly and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in January of 2024. Now, if you are new here, then hi, welcome. Again, I'm Shelly and I really love books and reading. It's kind of my thing. I mean, I only have a whole channel dedicated to the thing. I'm trying to get comfortable now. I have a whole channel dedicated to this hobby, and if you are enjoying the vibes, I would encourage you to subscribe, stick around. I also have a Patreon. It's a wonderful way to support me and my channel. And without any further rambling on, let's go ahead and get into the meat of this video. The first book I read this year, I read with great intention. I read it very intentionally, and I'm so glad that I did. The book that came about, the intentionality came about when I read this book about 6 months ago, and after I had reviewed it on my channel, a couple of people, or a handful of people, invited me to this tradition of theirs. It came about through a couple of booktubers here in our little corner of BookTube. Primarily, the people that I think started it is Sarah from Hardcover Hearts and Hannah of Hannah's Books. And those two ladies, I believe, both read or discovered that they both read. I'm not exactly sure of the details, but they were both a part of a New Year's Day read of 84 Charing Cross Road, and I got invited actually by both of them and a couple of other people to read 84 Charing Cross Road on New Year's Day. And so I was so glad to be invited, and I did participate. I also hosted or co-hosted an event called Remember December. It was a rereadathon, and we celebrated rereading in December. And even though I didn't read this in December, I felt like it really fit with the theme of rereading because it was a reread for me. And it was helping me kind of celebrate that event a little bit longer. So, what is this about, you may ask? This is a bunch of letters between mostly a snappy, fiery writer named Helen Hanff, who lives in New York. She writes for television. She has got a very particular sense of she has a forward sense of humor. She's not afraid to, ruffle a little feathers or give somebody a hard time. And she's writing to a bookstore in England. And mostly she's writing to someone named Frank Dole. And he is very buttoned up. He's like her absolute opposite. And you watch their relationship bloom over several years. It's a lovely, wonderful, funny, sweet read, and I was just so surprised and delighted that it really did hold up on a reread, even though I only read it like a few months ago. Also, in general, what a great way to start the year, reading something that is so sweet and lighthearted and kind of deep too, you know? All right, the next book I'm going to talk about is also a reread, and it also held up under a reread. I started it for Remember December, but I read the bulk of it in January, and it is actually Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. This I had read about, 10 years ago, and I loved it back then. I loved it, like stars in my eyes. I had my pupils turned into hearts, and I was just utterly in love. I remember I really loved Jane and her love interest, Mr. Rochester, and I just thought they were amazing. Like, I was all about their love story. Over the years, I have I've thought about this book, and I've understood just how problematic it is between Jane Eyre and Mr. Rochester. Knowing some of the issues and some of the, flaws, for lack of a better word, that has been brought up in conversation both here on BookTube and that I've read about, I was excited to get back to this, knowing what I know now. And it does hold up on a reread. It is such a thoughtful book. It is very philosophical. From what I know, though I know very little about the Brontes, Charlotte Bronte was very religious, and that really shines through in this book. What I think I love the most about Jane Eyre, the book and the character, is Jane's strong sense of character. She really weighs her decisions against her moral compass and what she knows to be as right and what she wants in her life. From a young age, she has such a clear focus as to where she wants her life to go and what is good for her. Of course, she learns along the way. She makes decisions. I also could see some of the flaws in this book that I didn't see before. Some of the contrivances, especially in the last quarter of the book. You know, I think I just loved it so much that I completely deleted some of that stuff from my memory, or I just didn't see it when I read it the first time. I was just like, whatever, like I love this so much. But now, again, on the reread, on this go around, I really could understand why my younger self loved it so much. Jane's strength of character, Jane's the way that Jane speaks her mind, the things that she thinks about, the things that she ponders. I just can absolutely relate and understand in a lot of ways Jane Eyre, and I could see why it's so loved. I just loved it so much. I read this with my friend Fraser, and I don't want to speak for him, so I won't, but I really, really loved it, and it's just so thought-provoking, and it's kind of like you love the whole thing, you know? Like, for me, I'm like, I know it's flawed. I know the relationships in it aren't perfect, or even like perfectly flawed, you know? Like, it's not flawed, but in this like immaculate way, where it's like they're not really flawed, it's actually perfect. You know, all that, the whole thing. It's like, I love it for what it is, flaws and all. And I like that I can say that now, instead of being like, oh yeah, I kind of remember this, or yeah, that part is a little bit hazy. I'm like, no, I'm clear-eyed about it, especially sitting with you all now, having just finished it. And I'm like, yes, this is a phenomenal book. It's phenomenal, and I love it so much. Let's stick with the Victorian. So on the flip side of a phenomenal book, I read something also set in the Victorian period, and I did a whole review about it, and it is The Fraud by Zadie Smith. This book is a hot mess express. I mean, if you want to know my actual, real, intense thoughts on it, I have a whole review about it in which I really get into what irritated me about the book. Now, having a little bit of distance from it, I can see why people like it. I absolutely understand that Zadie Smith is a good writer, that she has, a clarity of mind and a conciseness in sentence that is really just precise and easy to read, very smooth. This book just, it didn't work for me. In some ways, I really loved the way the first half of the book was going. It was like going in this direction, and then it just takes a weird left turn. And that's really what put me off to the book, was the weird left turn about 2/3 of the way through. And interestingly, it has not put me off to Zadie Smith's writing, but it has put me off to this book, and I'm going to unhaul it the moment I am done with this video. Let's stick with historical fiction and actually travel to the Napoleonic Wars. So I picked up Jeanette Winterson's The Passion because of Hannah from Hannah's books. I owned this already. I've kind of come to imagine that Jeanette Winterson is an author for me, though I have read nothing by her. So I was like, let's fix that. Hannah from Hannah's books had mentioned that she had read this book and enjoyed it some years ago, and I was like, I own that book. It's pretty short. Like, maybe I should just finally pick it up. And I'm really glad I did. It is talking about one of the main characters is somebody who serves Napoleon, who is the cook for Napoleon during the height of Napoleon's career. I don't know much about Napoleon, but you know, we're like hanging out in this book. We're hanging out in Russia, in Venice, and you know, we're kind of all over the place because of the nature of Napoleon and his mobility throughout really the world. I really don't know how to talk about this. I cannot talk about the details because it's really not about the historical part. It's not like historical with a capital H, in which you are going to it's not like War and Peace, okay? With War and Peace, when it talks about the Napoleonic Wars, there's a commentary about history and who writes history. And so there's a lot more of an emphasis of what Napoleon did as he tramps through Russia and how the Russians responded. This book is more like it's set during the Napoleonic Wars, but it's really more about the magical setting of Venice, the really like magical writing in that the characters feel quite unreal, quite it feels fairy tale-esque. And if it wasn't historical fiction, I would think that it was something more akin to a fairy tale than not, including parts that are a little bit dark, a little bit like off-putting in terms of like gruesome or just, oh, you know. And it also just features characters that, to me, I actually was surprised I enjoyed as much as, like, for as short as this book is, I got quite attached to the two main characters and their story and their interactions way more than I thought I would. I really enjoyed this little magical book, and that's really the best word for it. It is a magical little book. And I'm kind of surprised that it's not talked about more on BookTube because of it's just this beautiful intersection of weirdness and fantasy, fantastical, magical, mystical almost, with this historical fiction setting, magical characters, and the exploration of beautiful themes, one of which being the passion or our passions, what that means, and where they lead us. So I was actually happily surprised by this book. This is probably one of the biggest surprises, if not the biggest surprise of the month. So I know I talked about, you know, we're a little bit in Russia, I believe, and so I'm actually going to transition into actually being in Russia, okay? So I read Helen Rappaport's After the Romanovs. This is an incredible nonfiction book. It is so good. It's so good. So the subtitle is Russian Exiles in Paris from the Belle Epoque era through Revolution and War. This is so good. It really follows exiled Russians in Paris or in France for the first 50 years of the 20th century. And what's interesting is that since I didn't know this, and Helen Rappaport, she handles this subject so beautifully with such a wonderful light touch. It's just such a gorgeous book because it's like I'm learning all about the Belle Epoque era and why Russians are interested in France and the connection between the French or France and Russia in general, and just the way the relationship evolves. She does such a good job, and I walked away thinking like, wow, I learned a lot, but I was like also thoroughly entertained. It was so good. It was such a good book, and it's really put me onto Helen Rappaport's writing, and her main subject is Russian history. So now I want to read Nicholas and Alexandria by Robert K. Massey. I'm like on this little kick. So anyways, the point is that at the beginning of the 1900s, Russia has wealth, a lot of wealth because of aristocracy, and there's just a lot of wealth going on among certain folks in Russia, and so for reasons that Helen Rappaport gets into, some of those Russians are exiled. And there are like, I have favorite characters in this that are real people that we follow throughout their lives. And so for one reason or another, these people end up in Paris. And so they are incredibly wealthy. Incredibly wealthy. And so you get these salons, and there's even mention of like Proust, and the way that art, there's like a lot of art going on at this time. And so I think Helen Rappaport was so able to be so gentle and educational to somebody who I really didn't know that much about the Belle Epoque era. And so we're meeting all these artists, some of which are super wealthy, some of which are not, some of which have great mental health, some of which whose mental health is pretty on the fritz. And from there, we have the Russian Revolution. And you see Russia's wealth and the dynamics of aristocracy absolutely shift and change. And of course, that means something for these wealthy Russians in Paris. And what that means for them, both financially, but also emotionally. And then you follow them sort of through the aftermath of that turmoil. It was so interesting. It was really, really interesting. I would say, like, I don't know, there's this part sort of right after the Russian Revolution where things that very much politically get hazy. And at that point, I struggled to, I wouldn't say I struggled, but it did take a little bit more work for me to want to pick it up. Like before I'd be like, oh, I gotta read after the Romanovs. And then it was kind of like, okay, I'm gonna read after the Romanovs. And then kind of after you get past some of the political haziness actually going on in Russia, which Helen Rappaport handles it brilliantly. She doesn't get in the weeds where you're like, but for me, it was like a learning curve because I don't know much about the Russian Revolution. And so first, again, a newbie like me, she handles it well. She was able to guide me through that period. And then when we get to the other side, again, when they're more talking about art and what's going on with the writers and the artists, right following the revolution, then I was like back invested. I was like, I can't wait to read after the Romanovs. And so that was kind of my emotional journey through it all. It was so good. It was so enjoyable. And I'm just so glad to have read it. I read it with a subscriber and friend named Stephanie Cohen, and I'm so grateful that she was able to read this kind of adjacent to me. We didn't keep any kind of schedule or anything, but it was nice to know that someone was reading this alongside me at the time. Speaking of books that had me in its grips, like After the Romanovs, but something totally different, although it had me just as engaged or similarly engaged, and it was the next installment in the Linley series by Elizabeth George. Oh my goodness, what a mouthful. So I read the next installment with my friend Anita. We read For the Sake of Elena. And I feel like at this point, Elizabeth George is in her groove. She does such a good job balancing her main characters that I'm really invested in and I want to know all about. She does such a great job balancing that and new characters that get me invested in the murder, the murder of what happened. There's a character, and the more we get to know this character, the more I'm invested, and I want to know who did it, while also learning more about our staple characters. So there's this really lovely balance that I think she's struck at this point in her career, and yet again, she delivers like a great mystery novel. What was interesting about this one is that she explores the dynamic of a woman, a very young woman, and her relationship with her father. And I just thought it was handled so well. Elizabeth George always has this underlining theme, or this like bubbling theme that she kind of talks about male-female relationships, and sort of in the broader context, male-female relationships in life in general, when women end up in one scenario or another, and sort of contextually what that means in our society and how that happens and what we can do. She's always asking these really interesting male-female dynamic type questions right underneath all of her writing, and it makes the writing really, really fascinating. It's questions that I'm interested in. you know, that in general. And I think that the way that she handles it through dialogue and character interactions and even introducing new characters and how it all kind of plays out and sings together, I just really enjoy it. And that's one thing I really love about her series. And finally, I read a BookTube darling, and I'm gonna say something that I haven't said in a while, but Scott from Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, you are wrong. You're straight wrong. You're wrong. Okay. Scott DNF'd, did not finish Northwoods by Daniel Mason because he made this off. Well, he DNF'd it, so he didn't. You don't really know, okay, Scott? But he was saying that it should have been marketed. It's a novel. It should have been marketed as short stories because in some countries it is marketed as short stories, and a plot of land does not connect the short stories. And that was some of his critique. If I am summing him up right, I will leave Scott's video link down below. I will leave his channel link down below. He's incredible if you want someone who has sometimes very opposite taste to me. So I read Northwoods by Daniel Mason as a part of the Up to No Good book club, which is a book club that meets offline, even though some of us have channels. And so I will leave other channelers, the people who have channels, I'll leave them linked down below. Anyhow, so Northwoods is a BookTube darling. I think I first found out about it on Ben Reads Good, his channel. And then it's kind of taken off in our corner of BookTube from there. Okay, get to the point. I would say that the book is interconnected short stories, but there is a through line all the way. There's all the way through. The characters pop up, like the characters from one chapter to the next. They do pop up. And some of the people in our book club read it as if they weren't interconnected short stories, that we were just onto another chapter of the book. And there's always this echoing back or this hearkening back to the previous characters and stories, even if it seems like the plot has moved on. And I really liked it. I would say the ending and the resolution of it all, I loved. I thought it was great. I don't know if I loved it, like, it's not like the best book of all time. It was amazing, it was so good. But it was a really satisfying and enjoyable read. I think that if one goes into the book as if this is interconnected short stories, or maybe like has this mindset that you're going, you know, you have to keep sort of digging or keeping your eyes open to the resolution of other characters through the stories or through the eyes of another. I don't know if that makes any sense. Like it may seem like you're kind of leaving everything's open, but things end up getting kind of tied together in really neat and fascinating ways as the stories go on. And I think that's what I like the most. What seems to be masquerading as short stories are more connected than I had thought. And that was a really surprising aspect of the book. And I actually liked it. I don't want to say more than I thought, but I did. I kind of went in with not super high expectations, but also not super low expectations. And I liked it quite a bit. I liked there's a nod and a real love for nature. There are characters that really love nature. It does revolve around a plot of land, but that isn't the only thing connecting these characters. There's also just some of the characters really loved the scene, the area that they live in. And I really love that because I live in a place, currently in which I really love the landscape that I live in. I love where I live. The way things are just so lush and beautiful. And so, and then there's there's even like talk about bugs. I love bugs, there's just a bunch of stuff going on that I really enjoyed. I don't know, there was, for me, when I read it more like short stories, I did this natural thing where I was comparing one story to the next, and that's when I was probably at my least, I liked it the least, when I was constantly kind of comparing. But now that I'm done and I can kind of see it all as a whole, I can really appreciate what Daniel Mason was doing. So yeah, that's it. You know, I signed off and everything, and I'm gonna insert this in at the end. I don't know where I am going to insert this, but I'm going to insert this in. I don't talk about the manga that I'm reading very much because I feel like I don't know how much crossover there is. So I will say that I read Spy Family and I did a whole video about that. I thought it was charming, sweet, slice of lifey kind of awesomeness, right? Very cute, very charming. That is probably the best word for it. I was so charmed by it. I also started Berserk. I read the first arc, which is almost the first 3 full volumes of it. And I don't know the order of the videos, so I don't want to say too much because most of the manga that I read, I do kind of explain, I do a video about it and I talk about it as a whole. And so I haven't done, I don't know when my Berserk video is going to go up, so I don't really want to say too much. So mum's the word, but if you want to know, I will leave my thoughts about Berserk linked down below once that video is live. I am continuing on my One Piece journey, which has been delightful. It's interesting because since that's the first manga that I read and I got quite attached to it, the time I spend away from it, I do find myself missing the world and the characters and the very particular pace that Oda has. So there's that. And I started Death Note and I like it. I don't know if I love it, but I like it. I find it interesting. It's a little bit of like a mental mind twist. That's okay. But it's been interesting reading just totally different things. So we have like Spy Family, totally like sweet and sometimes surprisingly deep, but mostly sweet manga story. Then we have One Piece, and that's sweet with action, also surprisingly deep and quite nuanced, you know, like there's like One Piece. And then we have like the mental chess game of Death Note, which is like when I get into it, I'm like, okay, we're going to be playing chess here. And so then like I'll get into a chapter and it's good. And then there's Berserk, which is bananas, like who's bananas, crazy, off the rails, and wow, just wow. So yeah, but I again don't know how many of y'all are even interested in that. So sometimes I'm like, that's what I read this month. The reality is like I've read like volumes upon volumes of manga as well. So yeah, let me know about, I'm gonna let other Shelly close out the video, but if you are interested in some of the manga that I'm reading, or I don't know, let me know. If you're watching this and you're interested in any way about, the other things that I read, then let me know. I would love to know that. Okay, that's it. I'm gonna let other Shelly close it out. I'm gonna go, but what did you read this month? What was your favorite read of this month? I would love to know. Thank you just so much for watching. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really, really appreciate it. And I will catch you all in my next one. Bye!